Okay, welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Andy Lockwood, and I am with Lockwood College Prep, and this is a webinar for parents of college-bound teens, particularly for parents of high school juniors. You are in the right place if you are stressed out and confused and wondering if you're looking at the right colleges, what to write on essays, what are your chances, your true chances of getting in, how can you possibly afford to pay for college. And on this webinar, I am going to grill my colleague and former Yale alumni interviewer, Mr. Jeff Knapp, who is with me right now. Hello, Jeff. Can you see and hear me?
I hear you fine, Andy. How are you?
Good. All right. And just as we start here, please introduce all of you guys who are coming on. We got a good crowd registered. Please introduce yourselves in chat. Let us know where you are from, because that's always interesting to see how we grow our reach. And we're going to be talking about strategies to maximize or optimize your chances of getting in, but more importantly, big, colossal, self-sabotaging blunders to avoid, because Jeff's been a college advisor for 20 years. I'm about a year behind him in terms of experience. I've been in the field about 19 years. We've collectively reviewed thousands of applications and worked with hundreds, probably more than 1,000 families collectively. And we see a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. And there's different types of mistakes. There's mistakes of, when you do something wrong, a mistake of commission, as well as mistakes of omission, things that you forget to do. So we're going to be covering a lot of that to help rising juniors, class of 2020, who are going to be seniors and applying to college in the fall. And if you have any questions, please put them in chat also as we go along. Pearl is with us. She's behind the scenes. She's going to be moderating and flagging the questions. But if you want to flag your own question by clicking on the little 3-dot ellipsis thingy in chat, that'll change your comment to a question, and that'll make it easier for us. Okay, so can you guys, it looks like you can see and hear us. So Julie from Port. Gary does not see my handsome face. I don't know if that means he can't see me or he's taking a shot at my looks. Maybe, Gary, possibly if you can hear me, then you should just click on the big start the broadcast arrow. Other than that, you can hit reconnect at the top or just refresh your whole browser. This works best in Chrome, and there's a reconnect button at the top. David from California, Carl from Sarasota, Carol from Raleigh, North Carolina, Rich from Chicago. Okay. So I'm going to proceed. Oh, Nicoletta from New York City. Okay. Dane from Texas. All right. Global, at least coast to coast reach here. Hello to Irene. Okay, good. So if you have any questions, if you're just joining us, I'm going to be interviewing Jeff. This will be Q&A. If you have questions for Jeff, who is a colleague of mine who runs one of our programs that I'm going to be talking about at the end of the class here, please go ahead and pop them in chat and try to flag them. There's a little red kind of question doohickey thing that you can do. All right. Staten Island in the house, and Gary now can see me handsome as ever. Okay. Gary may need some glasses. I'm putting mine on. Okay, so Jeff, just as a little bit of background for people who don't know us, so I'll just talk about me, my favorite topic quickly. I've written a few books on the college process, and been a college advisor for almost a little bit less than 20 years. And my wife Pearl handles a lot of the financial aid forms. She files about 400 to 500 forms every year for our clients. Many of our clients don't qualify for need-based aid. We work with them on advising. So tell us a little bit about your background first, for yourself, and then kids you've worked with, and then what I find very interesting is your own family. It's very, very interesting sort of breakdown of different angles that the three of your kids have, paths that the three of your kids have done.
Right. Okay, good. Well, thank you. I have been involved working with families and kids for many years, as you said, at least 20 years, actually. I spent about a dozen years also as an alumni interviewer for Yale. And I kind of stopped doing that directly when my older children were in high school. I didn't want to have conflicts with some of their friends who may be applying, and I focused more on working with families and kids, helping them navigate the admissions process and the application process. I myself was a recruited athlete, which certainly helped me get into Yale, and I've helped many student athletes leverage their sports to get into academic schools they might not have been able to get into otherwise. Um, I also have an MBA from NYU after college while I was working. I have worked with kids and families in all different areas. My own children, I have had a very diverse range of experiences. My son was a very highly recruited athlete, literally could have gone to any school in the country to play baseball. His priority was his sport. He wanted to go to the best baseball school in the country that was also a good academic school, and he had those opportunities. My older daughter was extremely academically oriented, much more interested in prioritizing academics, had played softball in high school, but didn't feel like she wanted to make the level of commitment to play in college, which obviously was great as well. And she ended up going to Washington and Lee, and then spending 3 years at Emory, and then Duke Law School, and is an attorney now. And my youngest daughter wanted to go to a big state university. So she wasn't interested in the same kinds of schools as her sister, and ended up going to Rutgers. I've kind of had that full range of experience with my own children, and obviously have worked with kids that are interested in all levels of schools academically, as well as in terms of size, location, area of concentration, all of the different elements that help to inform what is the right place for you and your family.
Right, and yeah, and I think it's so interesting that in your own family that you've had a whole range of experiences. And I think the important takeaway for, because a lot of times people will ask or wonder about people who are in the college advising business, where do their kids go and how do they, whether their own backgrounds and what advice they give their own families. And I think the important thing is to have sort of an open mind and not have any sort of preconceived ideas or conceptions, or because everyone's different, and there's no such thing as a perfect school that is perfect for everyone. I should say there are individual, customized, perfect schools, and that's important, I think. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today is not constructing a college list for reasons that have to do with, I don't know, this, you want to keep up with the neighbors or the rear window stickers or the
Right.
highly ranked schools and all that. So it's very easy to fall prey to that. So let me, can everyone hear us okay? Because Jeff, you sound a little low. I think it's my computer. So if you are watching, listening in chat, please let me know if you can hear both of us okay. And if you can't, Jeff, you're just going to have to shout.
Okay.
Just
let me know. Just let me know.
The old Saturday Night Live sketch with Garrett Norris when he was screaming as a hearing impaired interpreter. Okay, so we originally made this about 5 mistakes, and we actually expanded that a little bit. So let's just zip through these mistakes here, and like I said, we're going to be stopping for questions. So, Jeff, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes you see when kids and parents construct a college list?
Well, I think it's hugely important to, one, have some sense of what the realities are in the arena. I mean, it's a very competitive arena, and it's important to try and have a good sense of, and we certainly can help, understanding where you're going to be really most viable and competitive, but also understanding which schools might address your needs. I'm always looking to level set expectations, and I think it's very important for people not to get too caught up. You alluded to this, Andy, not to get too caught up in the the reputation, the perceived reputation of a school. I'm constantly telling people it's not like there's only 8 or 12 or 20 great schools in the country. there are probably 50 to 100 schools that could be a great fit with your child, depending upon his or her interests and what the priorities are for the selection process. And that is, that really is important. Create a list that reflects what your priorities are. What are your areas of interest? What size school do you think you're interested in? What kind of location are you interested in? Urban, rural, suburban. How far do you want to be from home? Is that meaningful or important? There's so many different, what's the faculty to student ratio? And then, of course, incorporate how do the schools weight the various admissions criteria? Because there's a lot of commonality, but there are some differences as well. And then obviously present yourselves most appropriately. Create a list that is realistic with the right ratio of target schools, reach schools, and safe schools, and then present yourselves, optimize your presentation.
So one type of scenario that I see and hear a lot was when I was talking with Pearl about when I did our show on Facebook today, I know you have very similar experiences like this too. So I was talking to a mom, and she has a rising senior in class of 2020, and she was inquiring about potentially working with us. And I was chit-chatting with her, asking her about the colleges she was thinking her daughter was thinking of, and she listed like Notre Dame, Boston College, and some other really hard colleges. And I said, okay, tell me a little bit about your daughter's how she's doing academically. And she had like an 85 average and like an 1180 or something on the SAT. And so that kind of puts me in a position where I don't want to be the guy who's like bursting a balloon and saying, forget it, you'll never get into any of these schools, because I would rather say something along the lines of, listen, you never know what's going to happen, but here's the reality of who you're competing with. You're competing with kids with 1,500 or high 1,400s and averages over 100 because they've taken like 12 AP classes and all that. But I think the other question that gets overlooked a lot, and I'm going to give Pearl credit for this one, is that if you somehow manage to get into a top school like that, where you're kind of above your pay grade, and maybe it's you got in somehow because you did well enough in school, but you were propped up by a lot of tutors and a lot of extra stuff that you needed just to get by. And now all of a sudden you get into like a Duke Law School, like where your daughter went, or an Emory where she went undergrad or something, and you find yourself getting the first C of your life and losing confidence. And if you first of all, it's terrible for your confidence and just your mental state. A lot of kids come home, or they feel very uncomfortable, and they come home within a few weeks. But the bigger picture for a lot of kids is that they're thinking about going to grad school. At least they want to leave that door open. And if they beg, borrow, and steal and scratch and claw their way into a top college where they're lucky to get in, chances are that their GPA is going to be a lot lower than if they went to a school that was a little bit more of a better fit for them. And that'll hurt their chances of getting into law school, like where your daughter is, or in many cases a graduate school, because so much of grad school in general is predicated on your GPA and your LSAT or MCAT or GMAT or whatever. But you're more likely to get a higher GPA at a slightly easier to get into school, and frankly, you're a lot more likely to get more money from those schools also. So the top schools are not always the best fit for everyone.
No, I think that's 100% accurate. And I tell people all that you have to have a mix in it doesn't matter if you're the valedictorian with 1,600 SAT scores and a dozen fives on your AP exams, because the reality is it's such a competitive market that there are no assurances. And, probably over half of the kids that are valedictorians with perfect SAT scores don't get into the Yale, Harvard, Stanfords of the world. And it's not a reflection on the candidate. It's a reflection on how competitive it is. So people have to level set expectations. And to your point, depending upon individual circumstances, there's an opportunity to get money, academic money, at a school that may be right below the perceived elite. Those top Ivy League schools and others, they're not giving out academic money, generally speaking. You know that as well better than I do. Level setting expectations is important. but also optimizing that 40% of the application that is not directly related to academic performance, right? Presenting your leadership and your roles within your extracurriculars, really optimizing your essays, doing them to the max degree, spending the right amount of time and energy, and being intelligent in the selection of your list, identifying those schools where you have some unique opportunity.
All right, great. So let's move on. We just started to cover some other stuff here inadvertently. So mistake number 2 is going to be a little controversial. I did just see right before we went on a guidance counselor from a great friend of ours, Carla Kenyon, who's a guidance counselor herself. And I apologize in advance. I'm not trying to bash guidance counselors, Carla, as you know, because you're one of the good ones. Mistake number 2 is when you're making a college list is over-reliance on your guidance counselor who is relying on Naviance. So most of you probably know, but not all of you probably know what Naviance is about. So just briefly, it's a college selection software that most high schools use, at least around here and other parts of the country. But it's got some flaws. And Jeff, I don't know if you want to talk about your experiences with Naviance or guidance counselors, bearing in mind that we do have some on this webinar. but in many cases, I mean, I say this all the time. I don't think there's a problem with guidance counselors per se. I think there's a systemic problem because the average ratio of student to counselor is something like 400 to 1, and they're just not trained. They don't do things like Carla, who's on this webinar. Hi, Carla, by the way. Who a lot of them aren't really interested in trying to improve their skills as professionals, or they don't have time to do that. And Carla is one of the rare breed of counselors who does that. So. Anyway, Jeff, talk about that as gently as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that you've reflected that accurately. My experience with guidance counselors at a number of different high schools is that most of them are well-intentioned. The bandwidth is a huge issue in the public high schools. In many of the private high schools, they have dedicated college resources. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're less good. In the public schools, there are many guidance counselors that just either don't have the interest or the time to really focus on college. I mean, their priority is to help the kids get through high school and make sure that the students they're assigned to are fulfilling the requirements to graduate and to prepare themselves to be eligible for the kinds of schools they're interested in. But they generally don't have the time to provide any kind of personalized support and direction. I hear that all the time. I was on the board of trustees for the Education Foundation at the local high school where my children went, and we created a career and college counseling center and really did all of these things that you would think would be done by guidance, but they just didn't have the bandwidth. And we did it in conjunction with, in cooperation with the guidance department. They completely endorsed what we were doing and appreciated it, and we helped take the experience and the opportunity for the kids in that school to a different level. The other point I'll make is Naviance has, over the years, as I'm sure most of the people on the webinar probably know, has become more integrated into the process itself. So many schools, I don't know about most, but many schools are using Naviance as a platform to help automate the processing of recommendation letters and oftentimes sending of transcripts. Some schools do it separately. It can be a little bit confusing. Schools often, they use that to help the kids, create a little resume, largely to help the guidance counselors write a recommendation letter for a student that they really don't know that well. Doesn't really serve them that well because the admissions officers at the colleges can clearly see where there's a personal relationship or where there isn't. Andy's going to speak, I'm sure, later about the software that we offer.
Well, so let me just jump in here because that's an important distinction that I want to draw out here, because so Naviance will examine a student's GPA and standardized test scores and match those against all the other kids who got onto a certain school. So if you're interested in applying to University of Michigan, and you went on your school's Naviance account, you would see the other kids who got in over the last 3 years or 5 years or whatever, and their grades and their scores, which you might think, okay, that's good. It's a good start. Well, it's a good start, but that's all it is, because the admissions decision, and this is what Jeff was alluding to here, the admissions decision is predicated on so much more than just your grades and your scores. And frankly, you're not competing with kids in your high school. You're competing with kids internationally in today's environment. And you're competing with some pretty crazy parents too, as the recent scandals have pointed out. Parents who will do anything to give their kids an edge, mostly with extracurricular activities. Well, Naviance ignores all the extracurricular activities, and it also ignores everyone outside of your own school that you're not really competing with. So it's a much more artificially small data pool, and it ignores roughly 40% of what admissions officers look at. So what we try to do in our practice is optimize that 40% as well as everything else, because we have a different type of software that we use for our clients, and they get access to also. But we'll talk about that later for anyone who's interested in that. So let's move along here. I see some people are having some, I guess Nanette says the screen is frozen. A lot of times that's because there's other programs running in the background, and your house doesn't necessarily have to be your own computer. It could be, someone streaming Game of Thrones or something. So you have to be aware it's not just you. It could be other people in the house. So, but make sure you cut everything else down. Cut everything else out. Okay, so let's talk about mistake number 3, mistakes on the college application itself. And the way I summarize this is failure to understand that the act of filling out an application is not really just filling out a form, it's marketing yourself. So can you share your thoughts on that?
How you present yourself is absolutely critical. I mean, as we've said repeatedly, 60% academic, 40% non-academic, and that 40% is reflected in your extracurriculars, your leadership. And leadership doesn't mean you have to have been captain of the team or president of the student body. There's lots of ways to demonstrate leadership and initiative. Those are qualities that are appealing to schools. Initially it's so competitive, and obviously even more competitive at the elite schools. Initially, in my belief, colleges are looking for reasons to eliminate kids because they have so many applications. So you want to really make an impression, give the college some insight into you as an individual. And the opportunity to do that is as you describe your activities and how you present yourself in your essay. How are you going to provide some additional insight that resonates with the school, lets them understand how your activities and your interests have resonated with you, and how that has been reflected in your strategy to present yourself. I mean, those are the ways you distinguish yourself. I mean, there are a very, very few elite scholars that are going to really separate themselves. But I'm not exaggerating when I say that 70% of valedictorians and 50% of perfect board scores may not get into a school. And your child will be sitting back thinking, wow, I really had my heart set on this school, and look how I performed throughout high school, and be so frustrated. I mean, it's important for us all to help them maximize their opportunity, but also to level set expectations, because it is tough. There's an element of randomness, but we collectively can really help inform the schools that they pursue and how they present themselves, and that has a real impact on their success of getting in.
So let me give an example of a conversation I had a few hours ago today, and I have these. There isn't a week that goes by where I don't have a handful of conversations like this. I was talking to someone else who's interested in our services, and we're talking about the applications, and the dad said something like, "So, what do you help fill out the applications?" I said, "Well, honestly, filling out the applications, most of the application is name, address, and some basic dull biographical type stuff. But then there are 2 big opportunities that you need to avail yourselves of, and these are mistakes that people. These are a mistake of omission. I talked about it at the top of the show here, that people fail to do. They fail to understand that when you're filling out the activities section on the common application, for example, the order matters. You want to lead with your strongest stuff first, because understand that admissions officers just really skim each application. But those activities, that description, is really another opportunity to sell yourself. So an example I give frequently is, sometimes kids who worked over the summer, like they cashiered at a snack bar, they write snack bar cashier. And I will say, well, wait a minute, can we flesh this out? And I'll ask a bunch of questions, specifically like, what'd you do there? How many hours did you work? What were you responsible for? So then they'll end up with a different description along the lines of duties and responsibilities, which are, power words, included settling daily cash transactions of between $800 to $1,200, ensuring customer satisfaction, resolving disputes, maintaining a clean and orderly workspace. That's a different way to describe something on the application that's going to pop compared to 99% of other applications that just, they're just dry and they just are very, very factual. So I hope that helps. So you guys, let me, if you are paying attention in chat, I see a lot of questions coming in. Please let us know if you're finding this helpful so far, because this is not, I should have said this in the beginning. We are obviously promoting a program that that we're running for kids who are rising seniors, class of 2020. But this is also a class, so it's really designed to. We're not holding anything back. We're helping you as much as we can in the hour that we have together. So please let me know in chat if this is helpful. And I see questions coming in from Carla. All right, good. The guidance counselor and. Julie, and okay, so we will get to those questions. Okay, now let's go to some essay mistakes. How many times do you read an essay and wonder what the prompt was? Does that happen a lot?
I think, yes, it does happen a lot. Unfortunately, you have to make the commitment to put the time and energy in to really be responsive to, in this case, to Andy's point, to the prompt that you're responding to. It's got to be on point.
Sorry, yeah. So explain what I'm sure I should have said it. So explain what the prompts are, and in your process of helping kids figure out what to write about.
Well, in this day and age, I mean, there's a point of diminishing returns, but there's a common application that is accepted by hundreds of schools, and they have about 7 prompts I think you can choose from. The last one being write about anything you'd like to write about. And that really is an invitation to be creative and select your subject if one of the other prompts doesn't really connect with you. The Coalition app, which many schools or a number of schools absolutely require, is, I think 115 or so schools. And
dropping.
And dropping. And they have a set of prompts as well. The last one also invites you to write about whatever you'd like to write about. And then most schools, or many schools, certainly virtually all of the more elite academic schools, have their own supplemental essay requests, 500, 550 words or shorter, sometimes a couple of 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph invitations. Anytime a school encourages you to respond or offers you the opportunity to respond to with an essay, I recommend that you do it. Even if they say it's not required, do it. And the next point I'll make is they're not really interested. It's not going to, unless you are an incredibly creative writer, it's not going to be nearly as impactful to write in the third person and just simply be observant about some remote incident or something that's really unrelated to you personally.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a personal statement.
Yeah, they're looking for a personal statement. They want you to write in the first person. You have to pick something, in my mind, that you're passionate, an experience you've had, an activity you've engaged with which you have had some unique experience, and it has caused you to come to some conclusions, to change your beliefs, to adopt some values, to adjust your priorities, something that informs how you are going forward to be affected and have been impacted by this experience that you're writing about. They want insight into how you, as an individual student, are going to add to their community.
Yeah. And all right. So I want to interrupt you for a second, if I may. So because that's a very important point. Before we get to that part of it, what I wanted to say about the essay prompts is, think of the essay prompts as sort of a dry run for writing that you'll be doing in college. Hopefully you're going to a college that's going to help you develop your writing skills and critical reasoning and thinking skills. if you fail to answer one of the choices, what you're demonstrating is that you're not really ready to do college work. So it's really important, college level work. So it's really important that it's obvious which prompt you are answering. I mean, you have to select the prompt in the Common application, but if you were just reading the essay without knowing which prompt was selected, it should be very obvious from the essay. And if it's not, I think that's going to reflect very negatively on you. At least that's what admissions officers that part of our firm say. So getting back to the whole thing about it being a personal statement, I think a lot of kids, or what you were saying, kind of informing how you think, and almost philosophies you developed. I think a lot of kids might be, if they're listening to this, if they heard this, they would think, okay, I have no idea what the hell I think or what I'd write about or whatever. In your experience, like how is that brought out for most kids who, frankly, they're 16, 17 years old. They're just trying to get through their day, their daily life in high school. They're not necessarily thinking about some big overarching principles and beliefs and theories that the essay prompts seem to want you to draw out.
I just read one today from a student that I'm working with, and she was writing about how her uncle's passing really affected her, and how it caused her to reevaluate, her life, her challenges, her priorities. I mean, that's insight into her as an individual, some insight into her character, and an opportunity for her to express herself personally and with emotion. I mean, it doesn't have to be a death in the family. I've seen other essays that have been really interesting about what you would think might be a mundane experience, but really written personally. Somebody sitting for a half an hour in the waiting room at the doctor's office. So, it could be, a little bit more obvious, what was the experience like? They participated, with a group of kids with Habitat for Humanity. Or, it doesn't have to be this outlandish circumstance. It's just an individual experience or activity, and it's your opportunity to really express yourself. How did it adjust your thinking? How did you react? How did people react to this situation? What did you observe? How does it help the university come to a conclusion that says, you know what, this is an interesting person. They process this experience in interesting ways. This is somebody who we think is either open-minded or has some interesting opinions. They can contribute to our community.
Right. So the way I'm sorry to interrupt, but the way I think about this is it's you don't have to write about how you cured cancer or built a real country. It's really more about it's okay to go small, and that is more interesting and more genuine. So that's great advice. All right, let's move along here because I see some questions coming in. And I want to get through the next couple of mistakes here. So the next one is, and this is going to be a little controversial, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think a big mistake sometimes is when kids and parents listen to the wrong experts or listen to the wrong people who have opinions about the essays. So sometimes that's other kids, sometimes that's parents, sometimes it's other people in the family, sometimes it's English teachers. Very rarely is it someone like you who, or someone who's had experience with, helping kids get into colleges or evaluating kids' essays. So I would call that a mistake, listening to the wrong experts. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's a mistake I agree with you. Obviously, I agree with you. And I think largely the mistake, there is no one right way to do it. There is no one right subject to write about. There is no one, path or strategy. There's a way to think about it. You want to write in the first person. You want it to be an experience, and you want to reflect on learnings and impact.
So I'll give you a specific example. So I've heard parents say, "Oh, don't write about death. That's going to be too depressing." Or don't. You should definitely write about a disability, your ADHD, things like that. And I listen. You gave a great example of a kid before who wrote about the passing of a relative, and that sounded like it could be a great essay. So there isn't one universal, like you were saying this also, there isn't one universal path to take. And I don't really mind when, personally or professionally, when kids will show their essays to people that they trust, like English teachers, to pick up on grammatical things or whatever. But I would just caution, you have to really pay attention to people who have very strong opinions and insist that there's only a right way. I guess that's sort of what I'm picking up from what you just said there.
Right.
And it's hard. It's a very stressful situation. I think a lot of times when we work with kids, it's really not about giving them more information, it's just giving them the right information and a clear path to follow, and just get it done, hold them accountable, write it up, perfect it, polish it, and then maybe show it to an outsider, whether that's a parent, or a guidance counselor or an English teacher.
Right. I mean, these need to be succinct, and you want them to be short. And because, generally they're 500, 600 words. Nobody's asking for you to write 4 pages. They're not going to read it. They're not going to look at it. No, yeah. I mean, they're not going to look at it at all. So, there is a real opportunity to distinguish yourself. And this is, I think, a prominent opportunity to really separate yourself from literally thousands of other kids with your SAT scores and your GPA. And colleges are looking to be impressed. Once you have met the threshold, if you will, at the front end of the evaluation, then they're looking for you to distinguish yourself. And the essay is a great opportunity to do that. And again, we're talking about the writing. It is important, as Andy said, you've got to be responsive to the prompt. You've got to demonstrate an ability to understand and be responsive to what's being requested, and then you have to be attentive to detail. I mean, grammar counts, presentation counts. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people literally have the wrong school in the essay, reference the wrong school in their application, because they're trying to be as efficient as they can be. They want to leverage what they've done for this school for another school, and of course the core of an essay can be utilized in many ways, but you've got to be very attentive to those kinds of things.
Good. All right, so we're moving along here. I see some questions coming in from Gary, Patrick, Rich, Veronica, Audrey, and Grace, and Julie. So we're going to get to those. We're just buzzing through the 7, not 5, deadly college application mistakes. Now we're going to talk more about the supplemental essays. I see many times that kids fall down in the supplemental essays because they fail to understand the purpose of the supplemental essays, which is to be convincing that you've thought about how that college is a good fit for you specifically. I think a lot of times these essays are way too generic, and they could really apply, pun intended, or pertain to virtually any school. So Jeff, you talked about just re-explain the difference between the regular essay and the supplemental essays, and then give me some comments on some mistakes that you see with supplemental essays.
Well, the regular essays are generally much broader, more general prompts that are inviting you to write about an experience or circumstance or anything you'd like to write, and those lend themselves to being useful for many of your applications. The supplemental essays are generally much more, they may be very specific prompts, but oftentimes they're looking for you and they're asking you specifically, what is it about our school that is of interest? Why would you be an ideal candidate to be part of our student body? What is your contribution going to be? How are you going to take advantage of what we have to offer? You have to Andy's point, you want to be very specific. You want to be more specific. And you can't just write, I'm really interested in going to XYZ school because I know it's a great school and you've got a great, business program. You've got to be very specific. They want to see your level of interest. You need to reflect on what is it that's appealing and of interest. Is it the programs? Is it the faculty? Is it the opportunity to get involved in research? Is it the opportunity they provide for undergraduates, even freshmen and sophomores, to get involved in research? Is it some unique elements to their internship or their their co-op programs? Do they have something unique going on with their study abroad programs that relate to your major or your subjects of interest? I mean, there are a lot of ways to be specific, and they should be legitimate and they should be meaningful, because the admissions officers and officers they're smart. I mean, they can tell when you're not being authentic, and authentic is always important. So you have to put the time and energy in. That's why you don't generally want to apply to 20 schools. You're better off doing a much better job with an appropriately selected list of schools, and really spending the time and energy to make sure that you're being specific to each school that you're sending, to which you're sending an application.
All right, so that I hope people are listening and taking notes, because that alone was like a mini seminar right there. I think that could be really, really helpful for anyone paying attention and going to remember this stuff when it comes time to do the applications, and particularly the supplemental essays. Many admissions officers actually say that the supplemental essays are more important. They pay more attention to those than the common application essay, because of what Jeff just said, which is that the common application essay is sort of, it's very specifically about you as a person, but it's not necessarily about how you fit into that particular college community. So that was great. So I loved every word you said. Let's move on to the last mistake here, which I call winging it, or starting too late in the process. A lot of kids have a hard time getting going over the summer and into the fall, and it's a lot harder if you put this off to the fall, because let's face it, spoiler alert, many seniors report that the first half of senior year is harder than any other academic year they've ever had, including 11th grade, which is supposed to be the hardest year. Most admissions officers will say they care more about the first half of senior year, particularly in terms of the level or the rigor of the classes that are taken, and they typically want to see how kids do in at least the first quarter. My point is that if you leave the essay writing that we've been talking about a lot here, and as well as the other college related stuff, applications and composing the list, if you leave that until the fall, until deep into October, November, when you're going to have exams, plus you have extracurricular activities, maybe playing your sport, maybe you're volunteering places. It's a lot to do without the college applications, but to layer the college applications and essay writing on top of that is a nightmare. So I feel that the best time to get started on this is way before you get into the fall of senior year of high school, because you're going to want to die. So I'm going to, Jeff, if you certainly share your comments, I'm going to put up an offer for an application to work with you on the screen here. And there's nothing to buy on this webinar at all, just that Jeff and I have created a program to help rising seniors, class of 2020 kids, navigate the college selection, the applications, and the essays. And one of the bells and whistles that it comes with, besides Jeff's personal attention and expertise, which is invaluable, and I really sincerely think that if you do get a chance to work with Jeff, you should absolutely take that. But it also has some bells and whistles, like the software that was created. I saw there's a question about it actually in chat. That was created by sort of a mentor and business partner of mine who was on the admissions committee of Princeton for 30 years. And what that means is that it helps you and Jeff together create a balanced and strategic list, so that you get into, or your child gets into, most of the schools that he or she applies to. It's also very valuable in terms of helping identify schools that are likely to give merit-based aid as well as need-based aid. There's some calculators in there, and there's some, I don't really know how they do it, but some algorithmic web crawling type of way to get to every college's financial aid and merit scholarship requirements pages on their website. So if you're wondering what are my chances of getting a scholarship at XYZ college, you can, by 2 clicks, you can go right to that college's site, and they'll tell you, well, recipients of the presidential scholarship tended to have GPAs of, blah, 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 and tended to have scores of, ABC and so forth. So it's really valuable, not only in terms of Jeff's expertise, this program, which we call the Incomparable Applicant Signature Program, but it's also, the hand-holding and the expertise is going to optimize your child's chances of getting in, but it's also very helpful in terms of helping create a balanced and strategic list. So it's just an application to fill out. It's very quick. We're only able to onboard 7 people at this time, just because there's Jeff's only one guy, and there's a lot of people I see on this presentation. So just fill it out and get it back to him as soon as you can. And Jeff, you'll start reaching out to people in the next couple of days once you review everything, if you think there's potentially a good fit, right?
Oh, absolutely. And do we have a couple of more minutes?
Yeah. I'm going to get to the questions. So just you make your comments. I'm going to sort through them.
Okay. I was just going to reinforce something Andy said before about how important it is to really get going this summer. You do not want to wait until, and I like to really try and help motivate the students to get going in the summer. The Common App, the Coalition app, those applications are available now. Most of the schools will have their application available by August 1 at the latest. It is important to get the essays written to the max degree before you go back to school, if you can, because you're constantly going to be refining those supplemental essay questions, because the list may vary a little bit as we get into the fall, but it is important to get done what you can. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is obviously to kind of take some stress out of the environment. Andy alluded to how important the first semester senior year is. In my experience, the first semester senior year is an opportunity for you to dramatically change your narrative. You can reposition and present yourself differently than what your historical high school experience suggests. My youngest daughter really was very successful at repositioning and presenting herself based upon her first semester of senior year. She had not been that motivated a student. She took more challenging courses. She was much more effective, and she wrote about what had caused her to, change her priorities. And it made an impact. She got into some schools that you would not have thought that she would get into. There are schools that, clearly offer early decision, and many offer early action. If statistically early action applicants get in at a higher rate for a school you're interested in, you should be applying early action to all of the schools that you can on your list, unless there's some restrictions in a particular conference, and that's pretty unusual, but they exist. Early decision is a whole nother consideration for a discussion at another point in time.
Yeah. So you just brought up a whole bunch of other really important points, and that's all part. There's a lot of moving parts, and this was sort of a high level, one-on-one level type of presentation. But when you talk about early action, early decision, the Common App, the Coalition, all this stuff, there's so much that is floating around out there, and I think what Jeff is a master at doing is just clarifying everything and giving you that clear path, so you don't have all this junk floating around, and you're only listening to the right person, the expert, which is Jeff. So what you should do is just click on that blue apply button and complete the questionnaire. It'll take you maybe a minute and a half max to do it, and Jeff will receive them, and he'll start reaching out to you in the next few days to see if he thinks in good faith that there could be a good fit. Now, everyone's not going to be a good fit for this program, by the way. We are really both not great. Jeff's got a legitimate college student athlete background and coaching background. I was a bench warmer at a Division III school that half the kids got rejected from Yale and ended up going Wesleyan. But we're neither one of us is really good with working with kids who aren't willing to do the work and be coached. So that's really important. So if you have a kid who is not really motivated and you want it more than they do, and they're not going to be a good fit for us. So don't bother applying. This is really for kids who want to be successful. It's not necessarily for kids who are gunning for schools like Yale. It's just for anyone who wants to do the work and be successful and get expert coaching, save time and save money. Because we're going to be able to help pick colleges that are likely to give merit funding, and you're going to see a huge return on investment if you take our advice. All right, so let me buzz through some of these questions, Jeff. So there's a couple of questions about the software. Isn't it so hypercritical, overachieving that most kids need to create the wheel to get into a top tier school? Well, it's not the software that does that. It's just accurate. So the way I prefer to think of the software is that it's sort of a come to Jesus type of tool, because a lot of parents and kids have very inflated, I'm not saying overinflated, but inflated views of themselves because they may be a standout at their own particular high school in their own environment. But when you look at the bigger picture, meaning every kid that particular college admitted the year before, then you may realize that, oh, okay, I'm now stepping up into the big leagues, and compared to this, higher level of competition, things are a little bit different. And I think that is one of the big differences between Naviance, which doesn't help you with that, and that's why over-reliance on Naviance leads to many people being rejected or deferred by schools that their guidance counselors told them were safety or target schools, whereas our software does not do that. It's about 90. It's not 100% accurate, but they back test it every year, and this year they said it was 90% accurate, which is kind of how it's been each of the last 5 years that I've used it.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yes, some people will have an overinflated view, but in fact, that's not really, I think, most of the time the big issue. The issue isn't that your child is not capable or qualified for the schools that they want to go to. The problem or the challenge is that there are so many capable and qualified kids that have similar performance, similar scores, similar academics. How are you going to distinguish yourselves? I mean, a school we're using Yale, or we've referenced Yale a couple of times because I'm very familiar with Yale, but I'm familiar with Harvard, Wesleyan, Amherst, Bucknell, Emory. I mean, there are many, many great schools. Pomona College in California, Macalester College in Minneapolis. I mean, there's a lot of great schools around. And these schools, they may have a 10% acceptance rate, and they may have a 50% yield. If it's a small school, let's say 5,000, or relatively small. I mean, there's plenty of liberal arts schools that are 1,800 to 2,200 kids. Let's say it's a school that has 5,000 kids. That's 1,250 kids a class, right? If their yield is 50%, which is high but not unusual for a very elite school, that means they're accepting 2,500 kids, right? 50% yield. Yield is the percentage of kids that are accepted who end up actually enrolling. So if they have a 50% yield and they're taking 1,250 in the class, that means they're accepting 2,500 kids. If they have a 10% acceptance rate, that means they have 25,000 applications.
Yeah, right.
Think about that. To these elite or even outstanding, not even the most elite, but outstanding schools, 25,000 applicants. I'm almost certain that over 20,000 are qualified candidates. It's a very self-selected pool.
Yep.
You have to do the best you can at optimizing your opportunity and your presentation. A lot of it is leveraging the software so that you can really figure out how adjustments in your presentation are going to really directly impact your opportunity for success, the likelihood of success with these schools. That's why the software is so impressive. And that's also why those areas, that 40% that's not specific to academics, is your opportunity to really distinguish yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to sum up, I always tell kids there's a big difference between getting in and being able to succeed academically at that school. Those are two different things. Most, like to your point, a lot of kids can succeed academically, but that doesn't mean they're going to get in. So, yeah. All right. So let me just buzz through some of these questions here. And if you have any questions about the incomparable applicant signature program, just click on that blue button, hit apply, fill it out, and then you can talk to Jeff. There's no obligation. Patrick, won't a reader of the application see through the responsibilities and duties you suggest, including and conclude snack bar cashier? So what I'm saying is that you're not trying to mislead or try to divert attention away from the fact that you had a job. So what I am saying is that you can certainly articulate and advocate for yourself if you use the right verbiage and you learn how to be self-promotional, which is a really life skill. It's not necessarily only limited to college applications. But another point, which I never used to think about until this, until we had this college scandal, is that I have now seen, and maybe I should have said this earlier, but I've now started to see 2 cases where I have seniors who graduated this year, 2019. They had their applications and particularly the activities reviewed after the fact in the spring, after they had gotten into their top choice schools. But in light of the scandal, in one case, a client got hauled in before her principal and athletic director to respond to what they called inconsistencies in her application, which I found a little off-putting, and there weren't any. The whole thing was really stupid, by the way, which I won't get into. But I think we're in this post-Felicity, post-Lori Loughlin environment. I think everything on the applications is subject to increased scrutiny, and if you go into more depth and description on your activities, not only are you going to sell yourself more, but you're also going to be more convincing that you actually did what you're saying you did in terms of the hours you put in, and it's just going to hopefully alleviate any type of skepticism or suspicion that you're padding your activity sheet, which, let's face it, a lot of kids do. So I appreciate the opportunity to expand on that answer there.
And what you do, what you present in writing on your application, you want to be able to reflect with substance and color, if you will, in person when you interview. And you should try and take advantage. And we would work on this, and take advantage of any opportunities to interview. 99% of the time, those are very positive.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to how you promote yourself and how you market yourself. This is fundamentally a marketing exercise for many kids. Rich is asking, why do I think Naviance is misleading? I think Naviance can be misleading. If you're applying to a school where there's a ton of data from other kids in your high school. So I'm not sure where you live, Rich, but I'm in Long Island. Jeff is in New Jersey. So for kids in a big public school in New Jersey, in the Hunterdon County districts, Rutgers is probably a school that is very well represented on Naviance. And for kids in Long Island, where I am, Binghamton or some of the other SUNY schools, I think if you look at the average grades and scores of kids in your high school who got admitted there, fine. But if you start going outside that scope, Jeff, you mentioned McAllister, you mentioned Pomona. There's not a lot of kids from East Coast schools who go out to the West Coast, and if you attend a small high school, there's just not going to be a lot of data. So that's one big reason why Naviance can be misleading. It depends on the schools you're looking at, and the rest of it is that it only looks at your grades and your scores, whereas admissions officers look at 20 or 25 factors. So I know I discussed that before, so maybe you asked that question before I got to that. All right, I'm going to give you this question, Jeff. This is from Gail. When you apply to a school, are applications looked at as a whole or piece by piece? If your grades are not in the expected range, do they even look at your essay? You made a comment about admissions officers trying to exclude people. Does that apply here?
There are some schools where if you're not meeting their threshold, then you may not make it into a pool, the next level of consideration. I have had several, if not numerous, circumstances where I've had people I've worked with who did not meet the threshold, but ended up getting into the school. Schools, there's a lot, I'll tell you, there are a lot of things that are important to a school. One is obviously the student body composition. Another is their yield statistic, which is very meaningful to these schools, because for most of these schools, because it has a very direct influence and impact on how they're ranked. And ranking translates to desirability and is meaningful. Yield is an important statistic for them. So they want to know that you are absolutely interested, and they're just not one of 15 schools you're applying to. There's lots of ways to show serious, significant interest. most schools, almost all schools, keep a contact database. So they are logging in one form or another all of your communications, your visits, your outreach, to regional admissions officers, to the admissions office, your visit, the tour guide participation, whatever it might be. And that is meaningful. Now, those things happen early on. And most schools will also talk about the holistic process that they're engaged in. Regardless of the degree to which that's accurate, it's accurate to some degree with all of those schools. So there are only a few where I think that you're absolutely going to be eliminated if you're within the general range of the application pool. I mean, clearly, if you sit way outside, you're not going to get considered. That is true.
The only thing I would add to that is if you're at the low end of the range, which I think is a fair way to think about this based on your comments, it's incumbent upon you to do whatever you can to develop a relationship or any type of rapport with your admissions officer long before you apply. It's okay to reach out, and you can run into them at open houses. You can email them. You can call them. You can you want to let them know that you're very interested in perhaps even that school is your top choice because of that yield that Jeff mentioned. And if you can address your weaknesses and play up your strengths, in many cases, and I see this every year with a handful of kids, it's almost like the admissions officer becomes their advocate and rolls out the red carpet to do whatever they can to lobby for them before the admissions committee to get in. It doesn't always work, but you need to have an advocate there, someone who's going to take your application and extol the virtues of it and try to mitigate the weaknesses of it, which might be the academic component.
And that doesn't happen unless you have that personal rapport.
Yeah, and it can happen. I see it every year. We should probably do a whole webinar on that. Okay, Veronica, is it bad to mention overcoming an illness or missing school? Can that hurt you? What do you think?
Is it bad to advocate? Say that again?
To mention overcoming an illness or missing school, does that hurt?
Overcoming an illness or missing school? Well, it depends. I don't think it hurts in of itself. I think it could become a positive if that is an experience that has caused you, has enabled you to grow in some form or fashion. It's had a significant impact. It's informed your opinions. It's made you appreciate certain aspects. It's made you reprioritize. How it's impacted you, how it's affected you is much more meaningful than the illness in of itself or the weeks or months perhaps that you've actually missed. So it could be taken and become something that really gives the school, the admissions committee, insight into you as an individual. Just simply missing time, I don't think would hurt you significantly unless in association with those absences, you weren't able to complete minimum graduation requirements in high school, in which case it becomes a different kind of issue or challenge. But you can spin, and I say that in a positive fashion, you can present an experience in a positive way, even if it was a challenging, or particularly if it was a challenging experience. That's what I think.
The only thing I would add to that, and I agree with everything you said, the only thing I would add to that is sort of the converse of it, which is that if you were going to use that as an excuse to be defensive and apologetic, that is not going to reflect well on you at all. It's going to show that you can't take responsibility for yourself. So very few kids that, relatively speaking, at least that we work with in our sort of upper middle class and mass affluent markets, really have significant obstacles. Just because most kids in these types in these types of areas don't. But I was talking to a family today where they were telling me about the son. Actually, they live near you, Jeff, in Jersey, and I think they're going to enroll in your program. Actually, he's type 1 diabetic, and he's an athlete, and that's present all kinds of complications. Both in terms of athletic performance as well as academic performance. But he's been able to overcome that. He's got great grades, and I said that is a great story to talk about how you can't take certain things for granted that other kids take for granted. You can't rely on them for yourself. So I think it's definitely not going to hurt you if you can talk about it in a positive way. It's something you've learned from, but it can hurt you if you talk about it the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right there. So, so listen, we are a little beyond the top of the hour. I know we had some more questions here, but I want to respect everyone's time. I told everyone we would keep it to an hour. So I'm going to do my best to try to address some of the other questions in another session that we have in the future. But in the meantime, again, if you are interested, I saw a couple of applications already come in. If you're interested in exploring working together with Jeff, who is an unbelievable college advisor and got 20 years of experience, both professionally as well as with his own family, then what I really advise you to do is just that little blue button where it says apply now. I guess the timer actually counted down already, but it's still up there. Click apply, have a conversation with Jeff, see if you're a good fit, and if you are, then they'll go over all the fees and what's included in the program. But it's basically a program for rising juniors to get put their best foot forward on the college applications and the college list and the essays and everything that they need to do over the summer before school starts up again in the fall. All right, Jeff, thanks a lot. This was great. We got a lot of great feedback. Got a lot from our listeners. So this is great. Let's do it again sometime in the near future. You okay with that?
I enjoyed it. I love doing it.
All right, great. All right, everyone. Thanks for being with us. I know you had other things to do tonight, but we appreciate your choosing to spend the time with us. And we'll come back on the air sometime in the very near future with a follow-up presentation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks.